King Throgar of the Ash Marches had not halted his war column for anything in 20 winters. Not for storms that came down off the grey peaks like a fist. Not for siege, not for the dead, of whom there had been plenty, and not for the living, of whom there had been fewer than a king might like. He had ridden through all of it the way old iron rides through everything. Bent a little, scarred a lot, but never stopping. But he stopped for her. She was a small thing, a human child, no higher than his belt, barefoot on cold gray stone outside a holdfast that wasn't even on his map. A bruise the color of a thundercloud ran from her jaw to her temple, the kind of bruise that doesn't come from falling. She didn't flinch when the Orc King climbed down from his warhound's saddle. All 7.5 feet of him, tusks long enough to gut a frost troll, mail still red with the dust of the march. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She just looked up at him with eyes the color of creek water. Eyes that had already learned the one lesson a child should never have to learn. That the grown ones around her weren't coming. Throgar crouched down on one knee, and his knee cracked like a dry branch, because he was old and the march had been long, but he didn't let it show. He looked at the bruise. Then he looked at her. "Who did this to you, little one?" he asked. She answered without hesitation. The way a person tells you it's going to rain. "My father, sir." 3 words. No trembling. No tears. And in that moment, on the cold stone outside a forgotten holdfast at the edge of the Ash Marches, something that had been holding inside the old king for a very long time made a sound like a beam giving way. Before we go further, this hearth is brand new, and every subscribe keeps these stories burning. It's free, it takes 1 second, and it means more than you know. Hit subscribe, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and let's go back to where it all began. Throgar had been riding mired down to the marrow. His boots were caked. His back ached from 3 days in the saddle of a borrowed warhound that smelled like wet fur and somebody else's bad decisions. 4 of his Hearthguard trailed him on their own mounts, every one of them just as road-beaten. Every one of them wanting nothing in this world but a cold cup, a hot meal, and a bedroll that didn't have a rock under it. Karn Hollow wasn't on the route, a wrong fork off the high pass road that nobody sensible took, the better part of a morning out of his way. But the waterskins had run empty since the last ridge, and Karn Hollow was the only name carved on the boundary stone for another 2 days' ride. So he'd taken the fork and told himself he'd be back on the road before the sun moved a hand's width. That was before he saw her. She was sitting beside the ice, well outside Den's trade post, a squat stone building with a sagging turf roof and a door hanging crooked on its leather hinges. The yard was cracked flagstone and weeds, and the late heat came up off it in waves that made everything shimmer at the edges. She sat cross-legged with her back against the ice well, both small hands folded in her lap, like she was waiting for a horn that was never going to blow. She wore a faded yellow shift with a torn hem and no shoes at all. Her hair was a tangle, and the bruise on the left side of her face he could see from 15 feet off. What stopped him wasn't the bruise. It was the stillness. He'd raised a child once, a long time ago, a lifetime away from who he was now. He remembered how the young ones moved, restless, fidgeting, always reaching for something to climb or chase, startling at sounds, peering at strangers from behind their mother's leg. This one watched him the way a much older creature watches the world. Steady, quiet, like she'd already been through the worst of it, and there was nothing left under the sky that could surprise her. Throgar tossed the warhound's reins to Bok, the youngest of his guard. "Water them," he said. "I'll be a moment." Bok looked at the girl, then at the king. Then he had the rare good sense, for a 22 winter orc with more muscle than mind, to keep his mouth shut. Throgar walked toward her slow, the way you walk toward a wounded thing you don't want to spook. She tracked him the whole way with those creek water eyes. He stopped a few paces off and lowered himself down so they'd be closer to the same height. The knee again. He ignored it. "Hey there," he rumbled, as gentle as a voice like his could go, which was not very, but he tried. "You waiting on somebody?" She shook her head. Once slow. "You live around here?" "Yes, sir. You all right?" She didn't answer that one. She just looked at him. He studied the bruise. 2 days old, maybe 3, gone from purple-black near the jaw to a sick greenish-yellow up at the temple. There were older marks on her forearms, too, thin faded lines that might have been nothing, except that Throgar had buried enough and bled enough to know exactly what they were. He kept his voice level. "Who did this to you, little one?" "My father, sir." He sat with that. The heat pressed down on his shoulders. Somewhere behind him, Bach was muttering to the trade post keeper about the price of oats, and the keeper was muttering back, and a one-eyed goblin pony tethered by the well was chewing the weeds with the calm of a creature that had given up on the rest of the world a long time ago. "What's your name?" Throgar asked. "Esha." "How old are you, Esha?" 8. "Is your father here right now?" "No, sir." A small pause. "He went to sleep." Throgar looked toward the holdfast, then back at her. "Does he know you're out here?" She seemed to think about that carefully, the way you'd think about a riddle you wanted to answer right. "He doesn't always know things when he's sleeping," she said. Throgar understood exactly what that meant. He'd seen enough orcs go down into a barrel of mead and come up someone meaner. He sat himself down on the flagstone beside her, properly sat, the great bulk of him folding down onto the cracked stone, and he saw it surprise her. Just a flicker, quickly tucked away. Most grown ones didn't sit down beside her. Most grown ones didn't stop at all. "My name's Throgar," he said. "I'm just passing through, on my way home from a long march." She nodded, like that made sense. "You hungry?" She hesitated a half-beat too long. "I'm all right. I'm going to go inside and get something cold," Throgar said. "You want anything? Milk? Honey water?" She looked at the crooked door of the trade post, then back at him. "Den doesn't like it when I come in." Throgar went very still. "Why not?" Esha picked at the torn hem of her shift. "He says I bring trouble." Throgar stood up slow, his jaw set hard enough to grind stone. "You stay right here," he said. "I'll be back." The inside of Den's trade post smelled like tallow and old smoked meat and a barrel of something fermenting in the corner that had clearly stopped fermenting and started plotting. A clay lamp guttered on the counter. An old orc stood behind it, gray in the tusk, small eyes set deep in a face like a dropped boot, reading the tally marks on a slate and very pointedly not looking up when the king's shadow filled the doorway. Throgar took a stoneware jug of honey milk from the cold shelf and a clay cup of dark mead for himself and set them on the counter. "That little one outside," Throgar said. "Esha," Den turned a tally on his slate. "Don't keep track of her. She's got a bruise on her face the size of my fist. That'll be 3 coppers. Throgar set a silver piece on the counter and left it there. Seems like the kind of thing a body ought to notice. The old orc finally looked up. He had the mouth of someone who had spent 40 years practicing not saying things. "You're not from here," he said. "No, then you don't understand how things work in Karn Hollow. Enlighten me." Den looked at the silver. Then he looked at the king's tusks, which were considerably longer than his own. Then he took the coin and counted out copper with the slowness of a man explaining something to someone who was slow to catch on. "That girl's father is Dren Korn," he said. "Dren's brother is Vorgoth Korn. You know who Vorgoth Korn is?" "Never heard of him." Den made a sound that was half laugh and half cough, like even the name had a price. Vorgoth Korn holds the iron debt on this whole hold. He holds the note on the smithy, the mill, the brew house, and half the bedrolls people sleep in. He's seen 3 law speakers raised to the moot in 15 winters, and every one of them remembers who fed them. He slid the copper across the counter. What happens in the corn blood stays in the corn blood. That's just how it is. And the little girl, Throgar said. She's a corn. She's a corn. Throgar picked up the jug and the cup and stood there a moment. That bruise didn't come from a fall. No, said Den, and went back to his slate. It didn't. Outside, Esha was still sitting exactly where he'd left her. Throgar handed her the honey milk, and she took it in both hands and thanked him in a voice so polite and so careful that it put an ache somewhere behind his breastplate that no axe had ever reached. He lowered himself back down beside her on the warm stone. "You got anybody looking after you?" he asked. "A grandam? Someone like that?" "My grandmother Hessa lives across the hold," Esha said, "on the Birch Road. The stone house with the rune charm over the door. She know you're out here?" Esha worked the wax stopper off the jug with great concentration. "I don't think so." "What about your mother?" The girl went quiet a moment. "She died," she said. 2 winters ago. Her cart went off the river road. She took a small sip. Father wasn't the same after. Throgar watched the side of her face, the undamaged side. Her mother had been human. He could see it now, plain as the bruise. The child favored her, pale soft skin with no green in it at all, big creek water eyes, a little gap between her front teeth, and not the least sign of a tusk ever coming. A small half-blood girl, growing up in an orc hold that had never once let her forget she looked like the wrong half. Was he ever the same? Throgar asked. Not accusing. Just quiet. Esha considered it seriously. "He used to carry me on his shoulders," she said. "He used to call me his little ash blossom." She looked at the jug. "He doesn't call me that anymore." Bok appeared at the king's elbow, slightly out of breath. "Hounds are watered, my king. Boys are ready when you are." Throgar didn't move. Bok looked at Esha, then at the bruise, then at the king. He'd grown up on a hard scrabble, holding out past the iron hills, and he had the wits, just barely, to wait. "Go tell them to find a hearth house for the night," Throgar said. "Something close." Bok blinked. "A hearth house. My king, we were going to make the ridge by dark." "We're not riding tonight, Bok." Bok opened his mouth. Closed it. Went. Esha watched the whole exchange. "You don't have to stay," she said. "People don't usually stay." "I reckon," Throgar said. "That's been the trouble." He stayed on that flagstone with her another hour. She told him about her lore mistress, Syra, who'd once given her a carved horse and let her eat her midday bread in the lesson hall on the hard days. She told him about her best friend Pella, who'd moved to the Riverholds last spring and never sent a single rune back. She told him about a gray mare named Sugar her father used to keep before he sold the horses to pay a debt. A mare that would eat apple slices right out of your palm if you held your hand flat enough. She didn't talk about the bruise. She didn't talk about her father. She didn't have to. When the sun dropped lower and the heat finally broke at the edges, Esha said she should probably go home before her father woke. "Let me walk you," Throgar said. She looked at him sideways. "That might make it worse." And those 5 careful, practiced words from an 8-winter child, "that might make it worse," that was the moment King Throgar stopped being an orc passing through. "Esha," he said. "Where does your grandmother Hessa live?" "Birch Road. The stone house. The porch with the swing. Can I take you there instead?" She went very still. "Father won't like it." "I'm not asking your father," Throgar said. "I'm asking you." Something moved across her face. something that had been locked down behind those careful eyes for a long time. Not hope exactly, more like the memory of hope, a thing she'd filed away somewhere she wasn't sure she could still reach. "All right," she said quietly. He walked her to the warhound and lifted her up into the saddle, and she settled herself against the high pommel with the honey milk held in both hands, watching the hold go by with that same unhurried steadiness, like she was reading it. Esha Karn was 67 winters old, and she opened her front door before Throgar even raised his fist to knock. Because she'd seen them coming up the path from the window, and because, as Throgar would come to learn, old Mother Esha saw nearly everything 2 steps before anybody else. She was a small orc, wire-thin, white-tusked, with hair pulled back hard and eyes that went straight to Esha's face the second the door swung open. "Oh, sweet girl," she breathed. Esha slid down off the hound and walked into her grandmother's arms like she was walking into a harbor. Esha held her tight, eyes squeezed shut, and the king watched and said nothing for a while. Then Esha looked at him over the child's head. "You brought her here?" "Yes, mother. You're not from Karn Hollow." "No, mother." She studied him a long beat, the kind of reading old orc women who've lived hard and lost much do, weighing a body by how he stands and what his hands are doing, not by what he says. Throgar stood still and let her look. "Come inside," she said. Her hearthroom was warm and smelled of black tea and something sweet baking on the hearthstone, and she sat Esha down at the table and poured her a cup of goat's milk and cut her a thick slab of honey cake before she turned back to Throgar and really spoke. "I've been trying to get that child here for 6 moons, Esha said, her voice gone flat and tight. 6 moons. I've gone to the hold wardens. I've gone to the lesson hall. I've gone to Dren myself and begged him on my knees." "What happened?" Throgar asked. "Dren locks her in her room when she misbehaves." She said the word like it tasted of rot. "Vorgith makes his calls. The wardens say it's not their place. The law speakers say it's a family matter." She set her teacup down hard. "Vorgath holds too much of this hold, King. He doesn't care a whit for that child. Never has." A half-blood Karn was a stain on the name the day she was born, and a half-blood Karn made a ward of the moot would be a scandal he'd never wash out. That's all she's ever been to him, a thing to be managed quietly. So he buries it. Every single time Throgar looked at Esha, who was eating honey cake with the focused, undistractable attention of someone who had not had quite enough to eat in a long while. "Who else knows?" he asked. Esha made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "The healer who set her arm. The lore mistress. Half the women on this lane. The whole hold knows, King. They've just decided that knowing isn't the same as doing." "Why? Because Vorgith Karn makes folk afraid of what they'll lose," she said. "Their forge, their debt relief, their place at the high table. And folk will swallow an awful lot to keep what little they have." Throgar pulled out a chair and sat at her table without being asked, because his legs were tired and his mind was working hard and he needed to think. Esha looked up from her cake. "King Throgar." "Yeah, are you going to leave in the morning?" He looked at her. 8 winters old. Bruised jaw. Honey cake on her fork, waiting for him to confirm the thing everyone else had always confirmed. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. She nodded, like she'd expected exactly that answer. And then she went back to her cake, but she didn't ask him not to go. And somehow, that was the thing that got him. Not the bruise, not the brute who'd made it, not the clan lord uncle or the coward hold or the rigged moot that was surely coming. It was the simple fact that she had already stopped asking, that an 8-winter child had already done the arithmetic on grown-up promises and learned not to spend her hope on them. That night, Throgar sat outside the only hearth house in Karn Hollow, with his back against the cold stone and a horn of bad mead in his fist, listening to the wind come down off the plains and move through the dry brush. Bach and the other 3 guards were asleep inside. The road home to Ironhold sat waiting for him in the dark, the way it always did. He thought about his daughter. Kayla, she'd be 26 now, with a forge of her own if the rumors that drifted back to him were true. He hadn't spoken to her in 8 winters, nor her mother in longer. He'd left when Kayla was 12, not with a blow, not with a roar, but completely. The way certain orcs vanish from a hearth, sliding out sideways, replacing himself with rune letters that got shorter and visits that got further apart. Until one year there simply weren't any. He'd never been a Drencorn, never raised his hand, never locked a door, never left a mark that showed. He'd just left and spent 20 winters calling it a kindness, a warrior with no gift for the long quiet of a hearth, riding off before he could ruin it. Esha Korn, 8 winters old, sitting alone by an ice well because nobody was coming. She had not done one single thing to earn what the world had handed her. And the world had handed it to her anyway, wrapped up in grief and mead and clan politics and a whole hold's quiet decision to look the other way. Throgar had looked the other way his whole grown life. He wasn't sure he could do it one more time. He reached into the pouch at his belt and drew out the small thing he kept there, a flat river stone, and scratched into it in a child's clumsy hand. A single horse. Kayla had carved it for him the spring she turned 10, squinting in the sun, proud as a war chief. He'd carried it so long the edges had gone soft. He sat with it a long time. Then he put it away, got to his feet, and walked to the only place in Karn Hollow that kept a fire burning past midnight, Laura's night hearth, down by the brew house. He needed something hot, and he needed to think. And somewhere in the back of his old skull, a plan was beginning to catch, slow and not yet certain, the way fires catch in green wood. Flaring and dying and flaring again, until at last something holds. Laura was an orc woman of maybe 40 winters, with tired eyes and soot-stained hands and a topknot that had given up somewhere around midday. She filled his horn without being asked and said, "You're new." "Passing through," Throgar said. She refilled her own cup and leaned against the back shelf. "Folk passing through don't usually come into my hearth at the dead of night looking like they're trying to solve a murder. What do they usually look like? Hungry. You don't look hungry." "I'm not." She tilted her head. "You're asking about the corn girl." Throgar set his horn down. "Am I that plain?" "Word travels fast in Karn Hollow," Laura said. Den told his wife. His wife told her sister. An out-clan orc king walks into the trade post, talks to Den about Esha, then puts her up on his hound and rides her to Hessa's door. She shrugged. "I'm surprised it took you this long to come looking for more." "What's your name?" "Laura." "How long you been in this hold, Laura?" "My whole life," she said, "which is exactly long enough to know what you're thinking, and exactly long enough to know why it won't work. Tell me." She sat on a stool across the counter, wrapped both hands around her cup, and told him. She told him about Vorgeth Korn, how his line had raised the iron debt house 4 generations back and never once let go of the hold's throat. How half the forges in Karn Hollow owed on corn held notes. How the chief law speaker and Vorgath had drilled spear together as whelps. How the last hold warden who'd tried to file a proper grievance about Esha had been reassigned within a moon to a frontier watch post out past the salt flats, where the only thing to guard was sand. She told him about Drencorn, not with pity, but not without it either. "He was a decent orc before Yara died," she said. "I'm not saying that excuses anything. It doesn't. But there was a real person in there once, and whatever's left of him is drowning in grief and shame and the bottom of a mead barrel. And the girl just lives with all that, Throgar said. And the girl just lives with all that, Laura confirmed. Throgar turned his horn in his hands. Who's kept a record? Of the injuries. Laura hesitated, just a flicker. Syra, the lore mistress, Esha's teacher. She's kept a tally 4 moons now. Dates, marks, what the girl said and wouldn't say. She tried to show the hallmaster. He told her to bury it. Vorgeth sups at his table on feast nights. She refilled his horn. And the healer who marked the records false, he's not cruel. He's afraid. There's a difference. Is there? She looked at him a long moment. You sure you're just passing through? I'm starting to reconsider, Throgar said. She studied him the same way Esha had, reading the parts of an orc that don't announce themselves. Then she set the mead jug down. There's a young hold warden. Dak, the only orc in this whole hold who ever wrote up a grievance against Dren and filed it the proper way. It was overturned by the next morning's horn, Vorgeth saw to that. But he filed it. You'll find him at the trade post at first light. Gets a cup and a strip of Den's jerky before his watch, terrible jerky. Den smokes it out of spite, but the boy eats it like penance. Throgar set a gold piece on the counter for a copper cup of mead. Laura looked at it. Then, at him. You can't buy this hold's conscience, king whoever you are, she said, not unkindly. I know it, Throgar said. But I can try to wake it up. He walked back out into the night, the wind still moving through the brush, the road home still sitting dark in the distance. He didn't take it. He went back to the hearth house, hammered on Bok's door until the youngster answered it half asleep and confused, his war braid askew, and told him they were staying at least 3 more days. Bok stared at him. The hold, my king. Iron hold. There's the spring muster. I'll send a rune to Merrick in the morning. He can hold the iron a week without me. The walls won't walk off. Bok ran a hand over his face. What are we doing? Staying, Throgar said. Bok had ridden with this king 3 winters. He knew the tone in that voice. Quiet, decided, final as a gatepost set in dry stone. He nodded once. All right then, he said. I'll tell the boys. They're going to ask why we're risking a clan feud over a child none of us share blood with. Tell them, Throgar said. That's exactly the reason. He went back to his cold little room and sat on the edge of the bedroll in the dark. King Throgar was not an orc who wept. He had not wept in longer than he could remember, not at war pyres, not at the death of his own mother in a healer's hut 3 ridges away while he sat a siege he could have left, not at the cold end of his marriage. He sat in the dark of that hearth-house room, and he didn't weep now either. But something broke, quiet and clean, somewhere deep in his chest, the way old timber finally gives. Not with a crash, with a slow, certain crack. The sound of a thing that has been holding too long, at last, letting go. He was staying, and in the morning he was going to go find a young warden named Dak, and a frightened lore mistress with a tally full of dates, and a healer who'd told himself he was afraid when the truth was he was ashamed. He was going to start the slow, grinding, unglorious work of building a thing that a well-dressed orc with a moot full of favors and a clan name like a loaded crossbow had spent 20 winters making sure could never be built. He didn't know if it would work. He wasn't sure he was the right orc for it. But Esha Korn had sat beside an ice well on cracked flagstone in the falling heat, and looked at the world with the eyes of a child who had stopped expecting anyone to come. And King Throgar had come. That was where it started. Doc was exactly where Laura said he'd be. First light, leaning on the trade post counter with a horn of bitter tea and a strip of Den's spiteful jerky still in his watch leathers, his shift a good half-hour off. He was younger than Throgar had pictured, lean, with a jaw that hadn't decided what shape it wanted, and dark hollows under his eyes that said he hadn't slept right in a while. He clocked the king the instant the great shadow crossed the threshold. His hand didn't go to his axe, but his weight shifted, the way trained orcs shift when they're paying attention. Throgar bought a tea, walked over, and said without preamble, "You're the warden who filed the grievance against Dren Korn." Doc went very still. "Esha Korn," Throgar said. "The little one. I'm the orc who carried her to her grandmother's door yesterday." Something moved across Dak's face. Not relief, more like a door cracking open in a wall he'd built very carefully around himself. "How is she?" he asked, quiet, bruised, hungry, 8 winters old, and already knows better than to expect help. Throgar wrapped both hands around his tea. "Why'd you file it?" Dak was quiet a moment. "Because I saw her," he said at last. "Caught a hearth disturbance call out at the corn place in the cold of the year. Dren was deep in the barrel. Esha was in the corner of the kitchen, and she had a burn on her left arm. Fresh, round, about the size of a coal off a pipe. He said it flat and clinical, the way orcs say things they've had to hold at arm's length to keep functioning. Dren said she fell against the cook fire. Esha said the same. Didn't even blink. She's been trained to say it, Throgar said. I know that. Doc's jaw tightened. Wrote it up that same day. Filed it before the evening horn. By the next morning my watch captain calls me in and says the grievance was reviewed and found wanting. Couldn't look me in the eye when he said it. Vorgath made a call. Dak agreed. Flat, tired. You ever think about making another one? Every single week, the warden said. And every week I think about Harl Greer, the warden before me. Tried to push a child ward petition through the moot 2 years back. Within a moon they'd posted him to the salt flats, and his mate had lost her market stall. He shook his head. I'm not Harl Greer. I've got a sick mother in blood and about 2 silver to my name. He paused. But I'm not sleeping either. What if there were others? Throgar said. Enough set down that it can't be killed by one call before breakfast. Dak looked at him a long moment. Then I'll file again. I'll file everything I've got. But it has to be airtight, King. The first crack is where Vorgath gets his fingers in. I've watched him do it to better orcs than me. Then we make it airtight, Throgar said. Syra was already in the lesson hall when Throgar darkened the doorway, a lore mistress of middling years with a slate stylus tucked behind one ear and a shawl that had seen better winters. She looked up, and her face shifted straight to weariness at the sight of a stranger that big. My name's Throgar. I'm here about Esha Korn. Her hands stopped moving on the reed tablets. She looked past him into the corridor, quick, practiced, then back. Close the door, she said quietly. He did. She reached into a chest behind her and brought out a thing wrapped in oilcloth. Held it a moment, then set it on the table and folded the cloth back. A tally book. Bound reed paper. Nothing on the cover to say what it was. 14 moons, she said. Every mark I saw, or that Esha let slip. Days, descriptions, charcoal rubbings of the worst, when I had cause. She looked at him. Last harvest she came in with a split lip. I asked what happened. She told me she walked into a cupboard door in the dark. Syra's voice was steady, her hands weren't. She was 7 winters old, and she already knew exactly what to say so nobody would have to do anything about it. You showed this to your hallmaster. He told me to burn it. She met his eyes. I didn't. It's going to have to leave that chest, Throgar said. She pulled the book back toward herself. If I use this, Vorgath will. I know what Vorgath will do. But right now Esha lives in a house with an orc who burns her with pipe coals, and the whole hold calls it a family matter, and that tally is sitting in a chest, helping nobody. He gentled. I'm not asking you to decide this morning. I'm asking you to be ready. Because when this moves, I need to know whose names I'm holding. She looked at him a long time. You're not from here. You've got nothing Vorgath can take. Why are you doing this? Throgar thought of Esha on the flagstone with her jug, of a flat river stone with a child's horse scratched into it. Because somebody has to, he said. And it might as well be an old orc who's got nothing left for him to take. He found the healer, Elik, in his hut on the main lane, 2 rooms that smelled of boiled herbs and old poultices. A well-kept orc, silver at his temples, with hands that were always a touch too still, like they were compensating for something. He knew Esha's name before Throgar finished the sentence. I can't speak on a patient's marks, he said at once. I'm not asking about the marks you set down, Throgar said. I'm asking about the ones you set down false. That child has a burn scar shaped like a pipe coal. You've seen it. You wrote something else. The healer said nothing. But he didn't move toward the door either. I'm not here to judge whatever choice you made, Elik. I'm here because an 8-winter child is running out of time, and I need a healer willing to say what he saw. Elik turned to the window, shoulders climbing toward his ears. Vorgath came to me himself, sat in that chair. He didn't threaten me with anything I could name. He didn't have to. He talked about my practice, about how a hold healer lives or dies on goodwill, about how cases can be complicated. He stopped, and I altered the mark, because I was afraid of an orc in a good cloak. And I've hated myself every day since. Then help me fix it. If I do this, he'll come for my license. He'll take the hut. He'll try, Throgar said. That's different from doing it. Elik looked at him a long moment. Are you a law speaker, King? No, I'm a tired old war king from past the Iron Hills who took a wrong fork at the high pass. Something shifted in the healer's face, not quite a smile. More like the first breath an orc takes after holding it too long. And you think that's enough? Against Vorgath Khorne? I think it's what we've got. Elik sat back down, opened a drawer, stared into it, closed it. Give me a day. I need to think on what I can reconstruct. I kept my own notes, private, different from what I filed. I kept them because I knew, even then. He stopped. I know, Throgar said. That night the warband camped in a stand of birch off the road, and Throgar told them what they were doing and why, and that any orc who wanted to ride home for the spring muster was free to go with no shame. Not one of them moved. Merrick, a slab of an orc with a laugh like a rock slide, cracked the silence first. So, let me get the shape of it. We rode 3 days through the dust to get home. And now we're squatting in a birch grove, in a hold that hates us, picking a feud with the richest clan lord on the plains. He held up a finger, over a child who is, and I want to be precise, not even a little bit ours. That's the shape of it, Throgar said. Merrick nodded slowly. Good, just wanted to hear it out loud, so I'd know we'd all gone mad together and it wasn't just me. He spat into the fire. I'm in, obviously. I'm only saying, when the saga singer asks why we did it, the honest answer's going to sound completely deranged. The honest answer, said Creed, who almost never spoke, built like he'd done hard things and would rather not discuss them, is that we did it because nobody else would. He went back to staring at the flames. That shut even Merrick up. Throgar looked into the fire a while. Then, he said the thing he hadn't said to anyone in 20 winters. You all know I had a child. The grove went still in a different way. Kayla, I left when she was 12. Not the way Dren left Esha. I never raised a hand, never locked a door. I just rode off and called it mercy. Told myself a war orc with no gift for the long quiet did his blood a kindness by going before he wrecked it. He reached up and ran a thumb along the long lower tusk on the left side of his mouth, the one filed flat and blunt, where the others came to points. Bok had wondered about that tusk for 3 winters and never dared ask. You know what a filed tusk means in the old hold law, Throgar said. Bok swallowed. A warrior who walked out on his hearth. Marked himself so every orc he meets knows it before he opens his mouth. A shame brand. I filed it myself the night I rode away from Kayla, so I'd never be tempted to lie about what I was. He let the fire crack. 20 winters behind that flat tusk, thinking it made me honest. It didn't. It just made me a coward who told the truth about being one. He looked around at all of them. I'm not leaving this child the way I left mine. That's the whole of it. If it sounds deranged in the saga, Merrick, sing it anyway. Nobody said anything for a while. Then, one by one, without a word, they took their axes from their belts and laid them flat in the firelight, blade toward the king, the old shield oath, older than any of their grandsires, the gesture that says I stand where you stand, and I fall where you fall. Bok's first, then Pell's, then Creed's, then Merrick's, who muttered completely deranged as he laid it down, and meant I'm with you with his whole heart. Throgar looked at the 4 blades pointed at his feet, and his throat did something it hadn't done in 20 winters, and he blamed the smoke. Morning brought Vorgath corn. He came to Hessa's holdfast himself, alone, in pressed clothes of fine charcoal weave, because Vorgath apparently did not own the other kind. 60 winters or near it, broad through the shoulders, a face that had started handsome and settled into authority, tusks capped in worked silver. He had the easy stillness of an orc who never had to prove anything, because the proving had been done for him long ago by debt and by name. He didn't knock. He stood at the foot of the porch steps until Throgar came out and looked down at him. King Throgar, he said, pleasant as fresh cream. I understand you're new to our hold, and yet here you are. 2nd day. Still passing through. He smiled, practiced, warm enough to almost work. You've spoken to my mother by marriage, to a lore mistress, to a hold warden, to our healer, busy, for an orc just passing through. I'm a curious sort. I don't know what folk have told you about our situation, King. People love a simple saga. Villain, victim, a hero from the plains. My brother is a broken orc who lost his mate and crawled into a barrel. My niece is a little girl in a complicated hearth. This is a family grieving the only way it knows how. That bruise on her jaw, Throgar said, isn't grief. Vorgath's smile didn't move. Steps are being taken. Family steps. He set one hand on the porch rail, easy, unhurried. What I'm asking, respectfully, is that you let us tend what's ours to tend. You've a hold of your own. Walls that need you. There's no reason this needs to become something larger than it is. Throgar looked at the practiced calm, at the smile that meant nothing, at the hand planted on the rail like a claim stake. That little girl told me her father used to call her his ash blossom. She told me that while she sat alone by an ice well with a bruise a grown orc put there. She didn't cry. She said it like a fact, a thing that used to be true and wasn't anymore. He held the clan lord's eyes. That's not grief, Vorgath. That's what happens to a child when the ones meant to shield her decide she's not worth the trouble. Something drained out behind Vorgath's eyes. The smile stayed, but the warmth left it like light off a window at dusk. I'll ask once more that you consider going home. I'll consider it. Vorgath smoothed his cloak. Karn Hollow is a small hold, he said. Folk find it gets smaller the longer they stay. And he walked off without looking back. The way orcs do when they've decided a conversation is over, regardless of what the other one thinks. That evening Throgar found Esha on the porch swing with a blanket over her knees, though the night wasn't cold, watching the lane. "Vorgath came by here too," she said. "He didn't come in. Just talked to Grandma at the door. Grandma's hands were shaking after. He's not going to let me stay here, is he?" It wasn't quite a question. Throgar sat in the chair across from the swing. "He's going to try to stop it," he said. "I won't lie to you about that." Esha looked at the lane. "Father's better when Vorgath's around. Vorgath makes him drink less." But then Vorgath leaves again. She picked at the blanket. "I used to think that if I was quiet enough and didn't make trouble and did everything right, Father would stay better." She paused. "I was good for a really long time." Throgar felt something turn over in his chest like a stone rolling off a ledge. "Esha, it was never about you being good enough." "I know that now," she said. No anger in it at all, which was almost worse than if she'd screamed it. "I'm 8. I figured it out." She looked at him. Why couldn't he? He didn't have an answer that would do any good. "Are you scared?" he asked instead. She thought about it honestly. "A little. But I was more scared before you came." She looked back at the lane. "Is that dumb?" "No," Throgar said. "That's not dumb at all." The hold moved fast after that. Faster than Throgar reckoned, and faster than Vorgath planned for. At first light, Syra sent word she was ready. "He came to my door last night and spoke of my post being reviewed," her rune note said. "He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. I am done being afraid of an orc who thinks an 8-winter girl is a problem to be managed." Dak filed the grievance again by mid-morning, not just the cold season burn this time, but a whole bundle, his own account and rubbings. A sworn mark from Syra with 14 moons of dates. A sworn mark from Elik 3 reeds long that opened. "I make this freely, and knowing what it will cost me, to correct a healer's mark I set down false. In fear, of which I am not proud." Dak carried it through the moot hall himself, got his witnessed copy, and walked out with his heart going like a war drum. It held 40 minutes. Vorgath kept an out-clan law-speaker on retainer, Brask, smooth, from the river holds, with a voice that expected to be obeyed. By the high sun, Brask had a moot-friendly law-speaker on the matter and an emergency reckoning set for the next morning. And by dusk, Vorgath filed his own counter, not to dispute the grievance, but to reframe it. His petition argued that Esha was spirit-sick, unstable, manipulative, a meddler in a grieving hearth, and asked the moot to place Esha in clan, keeping pending a full custody reckoning that Brask's brief made clear would take no fewer than 6 moons. Esha read it at her own table and went the color of old paper. Spirit-sick. He's setting the ground before we ever stand on it. If the reckoning opens about you instead of about Esha, we lose before we say a word, Throgar said. "Do you have a law speaker of your own?" Esha looked at him, bone-tired. "King, I am a retired lore mistress on a widow's portion, in a hold where the debt house is owned by the orc suing me." So Throgar called for his own coin, not borrowed, not from the Ironhold's coffers, but his own war hoard, hauled the long way from past the Iron Hills. By dusk, he'd retained an out-clan law-speaker named Gaelra, a flinty orc woman who rode the 2 ridges that same evening and went through everything mark by mark, showing nothing, until she reached Elik's sworn tablet, at which she looked up over her lens. "How did you get this?" "I asked him," Throgar said. "And the lore mistress's tally. 14 moons, kept herself." Gaelra set the lens down. "King, I've spoken law and the plains holds 19 winters. I've seen 3 matters where the record was this complete. If we get this in front of the right law speaker, we have a true case. The trouble is whether this law speaker is the right one." He and Vorgath drilled spear together as whelps, said Hessa from the doorway. Gaelra nodded like she'd expected it. Then, we need every name on that witness list standing in that hall. The record wins on the tablet, but a bought law speaker can discount a tablet. What he cannot discount is 10 orcs standing up one after another, saying the same thing. How many do you have? Throgar counted. Dak, Syra, Elik, Hessa, Laura, 2 neighbors off the Corn Lane. The handful of hearthwives Hessa had called, 3 of whom sent back yes. 8, he said. Maybe 9. Get 10, Gaelra said. There was one name he hadn't counted, and he knew it. So that night, Throgar rode to the corn house. He turned it over every way and kept arriving at the same place. If Dren walked into the reckoning still drinking and still carrying his brother's water, they'd lose Esha no matter what the tablets said. But if Dren walked in as something else, as an orc who knew what he'd done, the whole shape of it changed. It was the longest shot in the plan. He knocked anyway. Dren answered in a stained tunic, barefoot, red-eyed, 3 days of stubble on his jaw, with the stillness of an orc who'd been deep in the barrel earlier and was now in the worst country between drunk and sober. I know who you are, he said. Then you know I'm not here to fight you. Can I come in? Dren stared. Then he stepped back. Inside was the particular ruin of an orc who'd stopped tending anything, dishes stacked, washing piled, a mead jug with 2 fingers left in it. On the wall charcoal portraits, a laughing human woman with Esha's eyes. Yara, Dren sat and didn't offer his guest anything, because it didn't occur to him. Throgar sat anyway. Vorgath's going to fix this, Dren said, his voice assembled out of pieces. By tomorrow night Esha comes home and you're back past the Iron Hills. Is that what you want? Dren looked at the jug. She's my daughter. She's all I've got left. Yara's gone. I talked to Esha a long while, Throgar said. She told me her father used to call her his ash blossom, that you carried her on your shoulders. Told me about a gray mare named Sugar, and how you taught her to hold her hand flat for the apple slices. That's the father she remembers. He paused. She also showed up by an ice well, barefoot, with a bruise on her jaw, and answered me without flinching. Because she's been trained to. Don't, Dren said. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because tomorrow Vorgath is going to make the reckoning about Hessa, and about me, and about an out-clan king meddling. And if he wins, Esha goes to clan keeping for 6 moons while law speakers argue. Then back to this house. And not one orc who looked away ever has to say out loud what they did. He leaned in. Vorgath doesn't care about Esha. He cares about the corn name. Is that what you want for your ash blossom? The word landed like a hand on an open wound. Dren put his face in both broad hands. When he lowered them, his eyes were wet. I don't know how to stop, he said, stripped and raw. I wake up and Yara isn't there. I never figured out what to do with that. You knew it wasn't fine, Throgar said. Not cruel, just straight. Dren pressed his hands flat on the table. Yeah, I knew. The silence after had weight, full of everything an orc carries when he stops lying to himself for the first time in 2 years. Come to the reckoning tomorrow, Throgar said. Not for Vorgath. Come and tell the truth, whatever it costs you. Esha figured out on her own that it was never her fault. The least her father can do is stand in a full hall and say the same. Dren looked at the portrait. Yara, laughing. She'll hate me. She might. For a while. But she'll know you told the truth when it mattered. That's something she can build on someday. You give her nothing to build on, and someday never comes. He left Dren at his table with 2 fingers of mead he didn't reach for. One more visitor came that night, and this one came to Throgar. He was banking the birch camp fire when Brask rode in alone and made his pitch. My client proposes the old way, Brask said pleasantly. Trial by the axe. You and Vorgath's champion settled in the ring, the way orcs settled things before there were moots to muddy them. Clean, honorable, very much. He smiled, in the saga tradition I'm sure a war king prefers. It was a trap, with the lid left politely open. If Throgar fought, he'd be exactly the brute Vorgath had been painting. A stranger who rode into a grieving hold and turned a child's pain into a blood match. Win or lose in the ring, the reckoning would never hear the tally, the burn, the 14 moons of dates. The saga would say a stranger came and made it about axes, and Esha would go back to that house while the singers argued over who swung harder. Throgar looked at the offered ring a long moment. Every winter of his life leaned toward it. The axe was the one language he'd always been fluent in. No, he said. Brask blinked. No, tell Vorgath I've swung an axe at every problem I had for 50 winters, and the one time it'd be easiest, I'm setting it down. Because the bravest thing I can do for that child isn't to be the monster he needs me to be. He stood, and the firelight ran red down his old mail. I'm not bringing an axe to her reckoning, law speaker. I'm bringing 10 orcs who are done being afraid. Tell him to bring whatever he's got left. Brask studied him, the easy confidence flickering, then turned his horse and rode into the dark. Bach passed the king a horn. You could have taken him. In the ring. You know that. I know it. Then why? Because she's watched grown orcs solve things with their fists her whole short life, Throgar said. And every time, she's the one who ends up with the bruise. I'm not adding to that count. Not even to win. He looked into the flames. Tomorrow she's going to see what it looks like when somebody fights for her without raising a hand. That's the thing she's never seen. That's the thing she needs to. If this story's got you hooked, take a second, subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments how many entries you think Syra has marked in that tally by now. More Hearth tales like this one over on Orc Girl and Human. Now, the reckoning is at first light, and Vorgath Khorne has never lost a room in 40 winters. The reckoning opened at first light. Brask was already in the moot hall when Throgar and Gylra arrived, pressed cloak, fine reed case, the kind of confidence that fills a room like weather. He glanced at Gylra, then at Throgar, with the look of an orc who has measured his opposition and found it beneath worry, and went back to his tablets. The hall was small, smoke-stained beams and benches that filled faster than anyone had reckoned. Word had gone round, and folk had come, not to speak but to watch, the way orcs watch a grass fire close enough to feel the heat. Dax sat in the front bench out of his watch leathers, Syra beside him with the oilcloth tally on her lap, Ellic a rowback, ramrod straight, looking at nothing. Hessa sat at the table beside Gylra. Esha waited down the corridor in the clerk's room. The law speaker came in, Patho, heavy-set, past his middle winters, with the look of an orc who'd made his peace with every compromise he'd ever taken and didn't intend to revisit a single one. He looked at Brask, then at Gylra, then at the room full of orcs, and his brows climbed before he hauled them back down. Brask went first, smooth and measured. A grieving father, a complicated hearth, a concerned uncle steadying a hard situation, out-clan interference from a king with no standing. An elderly grand dam of documented unsteadiness. He had 3 sworn marks from orcs Throgar didn't know, attesting to Hessa being spirit-sick. He spoke a long while, and he was very good at it. Then Gylra stood. She began with Ellic's sworn tablet and read it aloud, all 3 reads, slow, every word, every date, every line of what he'd seen and what he'd written instead and why. The hall went quiet in the particular way of orcs recalibrating what they thought they knew. Brask objected twice. Patho sustained the first and overruled the second, and the way he overruled it, short and flat and without looking at Brask, was the first sign that something in the room wasn't moving the way Vorgoth had paid for. Then, Syra took the stand. She opened the tally and read from it, date by date, mark by mark. 14 moons of a child's suffering set down in a lore mistress's careful hand. A split lip. A pipe coal burn. A girl who ate her midday bread in the lesson hall every week because the rest days were the hardest. A little one who'd learned to change her story mid-sentence the moment she remembered she wasn't supposed to say the true thing. When Syra finished, the silence had a texture to it. Brask rose. Law speaker, this is the speculation of a teacher with no healer's training. Sit down, Brask, Patho said, without raising his voice. Brask sat. Then, Pata, from 2 doors down the Karn Lane, a heavy-set orc woman in her 50s who'd spent 9 winters telling herself it wasn't her business, gripped the rail of the witness stand until her knuckles went pale and said, I heard that child scream in the night more times than I can count. And I turned my hearth drum up louder. Her voice broke on the last word. I turned it up louder, and I am ashamed of that. Then the first hearthwife. Then the second. Then, unlisted, uncalled, Den, the trade post keeper, who walked in through the side door a quarter hour into the reckoning and asked the bailiff if he might add a word. Patho looked at him a long moment. Permitted, Den stood at the front and didn't take the stand, because the stand felt too formal for what he had to say. I've lived in Karn Hollow my whole life, he said. 2 days back I told a stranger that things work a certain way here. I'm standing here today because I don't want that to be true anymore. Vorgoth in the second row said low and tight to Brask, stop this. Brask leaned over and said, equally low, I can't. And then the door at the back of the hall opened. Every head turned. Drencorn walked in. He was sober. He'd shaved. He wore a clean tunic buttoned wrong at the collar and either hadn't noticed or didn't care. He came down the center aisle and the room watched him in absolute silence, and Vorgoth watched him with the first genuinely uncontrolled thing on his face Throgar had seen in 3 days. Sharp, sudden alarm. The look of an orc who feels the ground move mid-stride. Dren stopped at the front. I'd like to speak, he said to the law speaker. Drencorn, Patho said carefully, you are represented by Brask. I'm dismissing him. Brask shot up. Law speaker, my client is plainly under duress. Sit down, Dren said. And he said it with a quiet that stopped Brask cold, the quiet of an orc who has decided something and has nothing left to protect. He turned to the law speaker. I hurt my little girl. More than once. And I knew it was wrong every single time. I told myself it was the grief that did it. That's a lie I've carried 2 years. His voice was flat and terrible in its honesty. Esha didn't do one thing wrong. Not one. She was just the nearest one to me. And I took everything I couldn't carry, and I put it on her. He swallowed. I need help. I knew it a long time ago, and I was too ashamed to say it. He turned and looked directly at his brother. And Vorgoth has been covering for me, because he cares more about our name than about my daughter. And I let him. That's on me too. Vorgoth Korn's face had gone absolutely still. Dren turned back. I'm asking you to give Esha to her grandmother. Not for a season. For good, until I can prove to Amut and to my daughter that I'm someone different. She deserves that. She deserves better than what I've been. His hands were shaking. His voice was not. He sat down in the nearest bench, which happened to be next to Throgar, and said, very quietly, without looking at him, I couldn't not come. I know, Throgar said. And then the clerk's door at the side of the hall opened, and Esha walked in. Nobody had called for her. She'd simply heard the voices down the corridor and opened the door herself and walked into the room, small and bruised and eerily calm, in a clean shift Esha had made her. She stood at the edge of it, looking at the law speaker, at her father, at the room full of orcs who'd come to decide her life. "Young one," Patho said, more gently than he'd said anything all morning. "You don't have to be in here." "I know," Esha said. "I want to be." She walked to the front, stood before the law speaker's bench, and said 5 words. "I don't want to go back." Vorgath rose. "Law speaker, sit down, Vorgath." Patho didn't raise his voice. He kept his eyes on the child. "Is there anything else you'd like to say?" Esha thought about it, the way she thought about everything, carefully. "Honestly, I don't hate my father," she said. "I just can't live there anymore." The hall was so quiet Throgar could hear the hearth coals tick. Vorgath sat back down. And for the first time in as long as anyone in Karn Hollow could remember, Vorgath Khorne had nothing left to say. Patho looked at Brask, then at Vorgath, then at the room, the healer, the lore mistress, the warden, the neighbors, the women who'd come because they were done being quiet. Then back at Esha. "This moot," he said, "grants the keeping of Esha Khorne to Esha Khorne, effective at this horn, pending a full reckoning to be set within 30 days. He looked at Vorgath. "I am also referring this matter to the High Moot, for review of how a prior grievance came to be suppressed overnight." He set down his stylus. "We are adjourned." The crack of his gavel stone was the loudest sound in the room. Esha turned, found Throgar, and walked straight to him across the front of the hall, past her father, who watched her go with an expression that would take years to fully understand. She stopped in front of the king and said nothing. Throgar crouched to her level, the knee, the same crack as the first afternoon by the ice well. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded once. That was brave. She looked at him with those steady, ancient eyes. "You stayed," she said. "So I could be." Behind her, Vorgath Khorne walked out of the hall alone, Brask hurrying at his shoulder, talking fast and low, and the door closed behind them, and the room began, slowly, to breathe again. Throgar knew it wasn't finished. An orc like Vorgath was never finished after one room. He had coin and debt leverage and 40 winters of favors to call in, and the keeping order was just that, temporary. He was right to know it. Because that night, Vorgath came to the Birch Road. Throgar had felt it coming since dusk, when Laura sent word that Den had overheard 2 orcs nobody knew asking the way to Hessa's holdfast, and Den, who had known the way to the Birch Road since he was a whelp, had told them he had no idea. Throgar set Bach and the boys in the yard and on the porch, sent word to Dak, and put Esha and Esha in the back room with no street-facing window, and told them to keep the lamp dark whatever they heard. "Jack," Esha caught his arm. "The old name folk used for outclan kings. Be careful." "Always am," he said, which was not even slightly true, and they both knew it. The 2 wagons rolled up at the dead of the night. 7 hired blades climbed down. Not raiders, the other kind. The kind that worked with numbers and the unspoken promise that if you were smart, you'd make it easy on yourself. Vorgath stepped down last, still in his fine charcoal cloak, because of course he did. He walked up toward the porch and stopped when he saw Throgar standing on it. "Evening," Throgar said. Vorgath looked at the 4 Hearthguard, then at Dak coming up the lane with his hands in his jacket, then at the 2 neighbors who'd walked out of their own doorways to stand in their own yards in the dark, unarmed, unasked, just there. "This is held ground," Throgar said. "Esha Khorne's ground. There's a keeping order. Your law speaker knows it. Which means you know that what you're doing right now isn't law. You're standing on a moot order at the dead of night with 7 bought blades, Vorgath. Vorgath looked at Dak. I'm off the watch, Dak said. But I'm still a sworn warden. And I'm watching an orc break a standing order. Sir, one of the 7 shifted his weight. Then a second looked at the neighbors in their yards. Then the one nearest the wagon turned, opened the door, and leaned against it, saying nothing, the posture of an orc working out exactly how much he was being paid to be here. Vorgath saw all of it happen. He stood in the dark of the birch road and watched his leverage come apart one blade at a time, and his face did a thing Throgar had never seen it do. It went uncertain. Not afraid. Not yet. But uncertain, which, in an orc like Vorgath, was the first crack in a thing that had never once cracked. You cannot keep doing this, Vorgath said, and his voice had lost its smooth edge. Something bare came up under it. This is my blood. This is my name. It's a little girl's life, Throgar said. And she said she doesn't want to go back. In front of a law speaker and 20 orcs, and she meant every word. She's 8 winters old, Vorgath, old enough to know what's been done to her. And so do you. You always have. You just decided your name was worth more than she was. The second hired blade walked back to the wagon and climbed in. The door shut. A third looked at Vorgath and said, almost apologetic, I'm sorry, Karn. I was told this was a keeping pickup, not a... He stopped. There's an order. I'm not breaking a moot order. He got in the wagon too. Vorgath turned and looked at what was left. 2 blades, his own driver, and the night around him, the neighbors, Dak, the warband on the porch, the king at the top of the steps. Karn Hollow, watching. Not afraid anymore. That was the thing Throgar watched cross Vorgath's face. The moment he understood the fear was gone. Not because anyone had threatened him, because enough orcs had decided, one by one, that the cost of silence had finally climbed higher than the cost of speaking. And once that decision is made in a hold, it does not unmake itself. I will bury you, Vorgath said to Throgar, quiet, stripped of all theater. You're welcome to try, Throgar said. Dak stepped forward. Vorgath Karn, by order of the moot, you're held for violation of a standing keeping order. The handcuffs were the loudest sound on the birch road at midnight. Inside, Throgar found Esha in the hallway, half lit by the banked hearth, her hair pressed flat on one side from the pillow. Is it finally over? She asked. He thought about the 30-day reckoning still coming, and the high moot review, and Dren on the far side of the hold beginning the longest walk of his life. He thought about what a child needs to hear at midnight, standing in a doorway in her night shift. For tonight, he said. Yes, just tonight. And tonight's enough. You can sleep. She considered that, the way she considered everything. Then she nodded and went back inside, and the door clicked shut. The last gambit came at dawn. Vorgath had gotten one call out of the holding cell, to a high moot law speaker named Fifth, an old dead of 60 winters who took the appeal up himself. That was a stay waiting to happen, one that would send Esha back to Dren while the singers argued for half a year. But Gale Ra was sharper than Vorgath had reckoned. He made that call from a holding cell, she told Throgar, while held for breaking a moot order, with his appeal pending before that bench and no advocate present. It's all logged. That is not 2 old friends talking. That is judicial interference, and the high moot does not overlook it. She filed it by the high sun. Rather than be reviewed, Fifth recused himself, and the appeal passed to High Law Speaker Mare, 12 winters on the bench, who had never met Vorgath. Brask withdrew from the matter entirely. Vorgath Karn was suddenly an orc with no advocate, an inquiry open against his name, and an appeal before a bench that owed him nothing. Orcs like Vorgath have two moves when the walls close, Gaelra said. Fight harder or vanish. This one vanishes. He vanished. The next 3 weeks moved the way things move when the pressure lifts. Steadier, like a river after the flood crests. Vorgath did not refile. He did not come to the Birch Road. He became, with remarkable speed, the thing powerful orcs become when their power is taken. Invisible. The debt house steward began making decisions without sending to him first. The Hold Council elder who'd deferred to Vorgath for 11 winters suddenly developed a passionate interest in oversight, which made Dak laugh out loud. 11 winters, Dak said. And now, all of a sudden, he's worried about how the moot picks its law speakers? Better late than never, Throgar said. I guess. Dak looked at him sideways. For what it's worth, I'm filing for the warden captaincy out in Leech Hold. I can't be the orc who fought Vorgath Karn and the orc who moves on from it. So I'm moving on. No bitterness in it, just precision. Throgar understood it better than Dak knew. On the 19th day, Dren Korn walked himself into a healing house 2 ridges over, of his own will. He sent word ahead to Hessa, and this time Esha was awake when the rune came, and Hessa asked if she wanted to send one back, and Esha held the reed a long moment before she said yes. When she came back out to the porch where Throgar sat, her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. She picked at the loose railing she'd been working at since the first day. How was that? Throgar asked. Hard, she said. He said he's going to try. He said he can't promise he'll make it. But he's going to try. She pulled at the wood. I told him that was okay. Is that the right thing to say? I think so, Throgar said. You gave him room without promising him anything. That's about right. She pulled the railing piece loose, looked at it, and set it on the step beside her. Jack, she said, and it was the first time she'd used the name. She tried the shape of it, careful, like a stone she wasn't sure would hold her weight. After the next reckoning, you have to go back, don't you? You've got a hold. Orcs depending on you. I do, he said. That's the truth. I've been gone almost a moon. She nodded slowly. I knew. A pause. Are you going to forget about us? No, orcs say that. I know they do. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I'm going to come back, Esha, not a visit. Not passing through. I'm going to come back and sit on this porch and eat whatever Hessa's been baking and hear about the lesson hall. I'm going to keep coming back. That's what I'm telling you. She looked at him a long time, not deciding whether to believe him, he thought, but deciding whether to let herself want to. Okay, she said finally, the same word she'd said on the first night. Quiet and careful, and holding everything she hadn't said. The full reckoning on the 30th day lasted the length of a short meal. Vorgath did not come. High Law Speaker Mare noted his absence, reviewed the record with the focused attention of an orc who'd read every read before she walked in, asked Gaelra 3 questions, and Hessa too looked at the tally and the burn and Ellic's corrected mark. Then looked at Esha, who sat beside her grandmother in a clean shift with her hair brushed, and asked her plainly, Esha, Karn, do you want to live with your grandmother? Yes, Law Speaker. Then that's where you'll live. And she pressed her seal ring into the wax. It was the simplest thing. The most enormous, simple thing Throgar had ever watched. Esha pressed her lips together so hard, they went white. She didn't weep in the hall. She waited until the yard, and then she put her face in both hands for the space of 10 breaths, and then she straightened and said, "Let's go home." Esha held her hand all the way to the cart and didn't let go. That night, after the child was abed, Throgar sat at Esha's table and did a thing he hadn't done in years. He carved a rune letter. To Kayla, 4 tablets long, in the clumsy hand of an orc always better at doing than saying, which is likely why it took him so long. He told her he'd been in a small hold helping a little girl he'd met by a trade post. That the girl had asked him a question he hadn't known how to answer. Whether his own daughter thought he'd stopped loving her. He told her he didn't know the answer to that, and that was on him, not on her. He told her he hadn't been the father she deserved, and that he'd spent 20 winters telling himself that leaving clean was kinder than staying broken, and that an 8-winter girl had shown him, without meaning to, exactly how wrong that was. He told her he'd understand if she didn't want to hear from him. He told her he was going to keep writing anyway. He sealed it and gave it to Esha to send to the last forge mark he had for Kayla, 6 winters cold. "You're a good orc, Throgar," Esha said, taking it. "Took you long enough to act like one." He laughed. A real one, short and surprised. "Yes, mother," he said. "It did." He left Karn Hollow the next morning, Bok driving the lead hound, the plains opening flat and gold in the early light. He thought of Vorgoth, gone to ground since the inquiry opened. Of Dak packing for Leech Hold. Of Syra, who had stopped keeping a tally because she no longer had to. The lesson hall had quietly put a true reporting rule in place, signed without a single message to Vorgoth Khorne. He thought about Karn Hollow changing. Not all at once. Holds don't. But the way a crack opens in old stone, letting water in, then grass, until one day the stone isn't what holds the shape anymore. And he thought about Esha, asleep on the birch road with her carved horse on the shelf and the door unlocked. 3 weeks on, a rune bird reached Iron Hold from a forge 2 ridges past the eastern salt. 5 lines, in Kayla's hand, smaller than he remembered, more careful, but hers. "I got your letter. I don't know what I want to say yet. But I'm glad you wrote. I'll write again when I do. K." Throgar read it 3 times, standing at the gate. Then he folded it and tucked it into the pouch at his belt, beside the flat river stone with a child's horse scratched into it, and walked back to the forges. If you're still with us, you're part of this story now. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell us in the comments which moment hit you hardest, the filed tusk, the tally, or the 5 words she said in the moot. More tales from the long fires over on Orc Girl and Human. Winter came early to the plains that year. By the bone moon, the cold dropped hard and fast off the gray peaks. Throgar had been home 4 moons, and he'd sent a rune to Esha twice a moon, each time hearing how Esha fared in the lesson hall well, which surprised no one, what she'd been reading, and how the carved horse had turned into a real and serious interest in actual horses, which Esha was considering carefully. On the 2nd frost day of the bone moon, Throgar loaded a bag onto a hound and told Bok he'd be gone the week. "Karn Hollow," Bok said. It wasn't a question. Karn Hollow. "Give her our best," Bok said. Then, because he was Bok, and tell Den his jerky is a war crime. Throgar rode the long way back, 2 days of it. He'd ridden it before, and he'd ride it again. He was getting better at knowing the road wasn't an escape, just a distance between 2 places that mattered. He turned onto the birch road in the early afternoon. The cottonwood in the neighbor's yard had gone bare, and the air had that decided winter cold in it that brooks no argument. He reined up in front of Esha's holdfast and sat a moment with the hound's breath steaming. The door opened before he reached the porch. Esha stood in it. She'd grown, not much, but enough to notice. Her hair was longer. She wore a blue wool overshirt slightly too big for her, probably Hessa's, and she was holding something in both hands, careful and level. Throgar climbed down and came to the foot of the steps and looked up at her. She held out what she carried. A honey cake, still warm from the way she cradled it. Hessa's own recipe, the same one Esha had eaten that very first afternoon at the kitchen table with the desperate, undistractable attention of a child who hadn't had enough. "Grandma said you were coming," Esha said. "I helped make it." Throgar looked at the cake. Then at the girl, not the child beside the ice well, though she was still that too, and would carry that a long time, the way orcs carry the hard things. But something else now as well. Something new, and tentative, and beginning, like green wood after a fire. "You came back," she said. "Told you I would," he said. She looked at him a moment, that old steadiness, that careful reading of the world, and then something in her face opened. Not wide, not all at once, just enough. Just the first real version of it, the kind that hadn't been practiced into shape. She smiled. Throgar climbed the porch steps and took the honey cake from her hands so she wouldn't drop it. And he set his great rough palm briefly on her shoulder, the lightest touch, the kind that says, "I see you. I'm here. You're all right," in the language that doesn't need words. And they went inside. That is the truth of what happened in Karn Hollow. In the summer and fall of a year when a tired old war king took a wrong fork off the high pass road and found, beside a trade post ice well, the reason he'd been put under the sky. Not glory, not a fight he could win with his hands. Just a girl who had stopped expecting anyone to come, and an orc who finally understood that staying is the bravest thing a creature can do. Braver than charging. Braver than the wall of shields. Braver than any war horn or any 8-breath ride into the spears, he stayed. And because he stayed, she learned to believe that the world holds people who mean what they say. That is the thing that cannot be taken. Not by a moot, not by a clan name, not by 40 winters of bought power or a single call from a holding cell. Once a child learns that someone will come back, truly learns it, in the body, in the bone, that knowledge becomes the ground that everything else is built on. Throgar came back. And Esha built her whole life on it.